What you're about to hear isn't just another fiery moment in Congress, it's a reckoning. Representative Sean Casten didn't hold back when he called out Donald Trump as a child predator and accused Speaker Mike Johnson and the GOP of protecting those hiding behind the Epstein list.
Let me recognize Representative Sean Casten from Illinois.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal. Mr. Ryder, you closed your opening remarks referencing the Epstein files. I want to share a story. I was talking with a teacher in Berwyn, and she said one of the parents of one of the students in her class said, "I am less concerned about whether a masked, unidentified ICE officer seizes my child than I am with whether a child trafficker dressed as a masked, ununiformed ICE officer seizes my child." And I want us all to understand that Donald Trump is not the only child predator who is being protected by Mike Johnson, who is being protected by Kristi Noem, who is being protected by every one of our Republican colleagues who refuses to do their goddamn job right now. And we got to call that out in the same way Jasmine Crockett just did. I can get real emotional here, but I'm going to try to stay within the bounds of the law, at least for a little while. Mr. Fee, Fifth Amendment says that every American, not every American, everybody within our borders has a right to due process. 14th Amendment says that everybody has afforded equal protection under the law. The Fourth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, no unlawful search and seizure. You can't be detained, cruel and unusual punishment. At what point in ICE's current process are they affording detainees with those rights?
It's difficult to identify any point in the process where they're following any of their detainees' rights consistently.
So is there a timing? When do they provide somebody with information? What's the legal basis for your detention? When do they provide people with notification of your due process rights? Ever?
In the instances that I've been involved with, it's not happened.
And is there any, I mean, we all watch cop shows, right? We all know the Miranda warning. Is there any exemption that ICE is not obligated to provide people with their constitutional protections that other law enforcement agents have?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so let me shift now to Broadview. ICE right now has this online detainee locator system, which is not mandated by law, right? They're providing this that you can look and see if somebody is being detained. That database does not provide any information about anybody in these quote-unquote temporary holding facilities, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so nobody knows. People get picked up off the street, they get swept up, they get disappeared. They don't know what their rights are, and we don't know where they are. Is that legal under any reasonable reading of the Constitution?
Absolutely not. And these folks are denied access to counsel as a matter of policy, and they're constitutionally entitled to that, and they do not receive it.
Okay. Several of our witnesses, I think Pastor Black had mentioned this, I think I'm forgetting, but several of you had mentioned that if you're breaking the law, there are consequences that can be held. I know people had mentioned our governor should maybe step up, maybe our attorney general. My understanding is that a lot of the enforcement of law is typically done by district attorneys, state's attorneys. Can you give any sense of the process for state's attorneys and district attorneys who are watching today? What process would they need to go through to prosecute ICE officers who, as law enforcement officers, are expressly violating people's constitutional protections? And whether you want to talk about breaking and entering, whether you want to talk about unlawful search and seizure, whether you want to talk about murder, I mean, all of these things seem to be happening. What is the process? Do state's attorneys have the ability to use that right now? District attorneys, what would they have to do in order to begin bringing penalties against these individuals?
I'd have to defer to my colleagues in the state government, but certainly folks have the right to get civil remedies against violations of the Constitution by federal law enforcement, and people are moving in that direction and are seeking that redress in courts.
Okay, well, I hope we can give some thought about that. California several years ago did bring charges against an ICE officer. Now, he was off duty when they did it, but there is a precedent for state officials doing that. And, those of us who are out here who are angry, we're responsible for writing the laws. We don't have law enforcement authority, and I think our law enforcement partners can help. Pastor Black, I'd like to give you the final word, and I see I'm running out of time here. Speaker Johnson famously said, "If you want to know what I believe, just read the Bible."
What we just heard from Representative Sean Casten wasn't your typical partisan soundbite. It was an unfiltered moment of truth, the kind that pierces through the noise and forces us to look at the moral decay eating away at the foundation of our democracy. When Casten called Donald Trump a child predator and accused Speaker Mike Johnson and the Republican Party of protecting predators and shielding the Epstein list, he wasn't merely engaging in political theater. He was making a moral indictment, one that connects power, privilege, and protection in a way that demands our full attention. This moment captures something much larger than one fiery exchange. It lays bare the double standard that has plagued American justice, where laws are applied differently depending on who you are, what you look like, and what political banner you stand under. Casten's fury wasn't just about Trump or Johnson. It was about the hypocrisy of a political class that wraps itself in the language of morality and faith while enabling cruelty and corruption behind closed doors. When he invoked that story, a mother saying she's more afraid of a child trafficker dressed as an ICE officer than a criminal on the streets, that's not hyperbole. That's a window into what millions of families in immigrant communities actually live through every day: fear, uncertainty, invisibility. They're not only worried about deportation, they're terrified of a system that treats them as less than human. A system where federal agents can detain people without due process, without counsel, and without accountability. Casten's questioning drilled into something that's been ignored for too long: the erosion of constitutional rights under the pretext of enforcement. The Fourth Amendment's protection against unlawful searches and seizures, the Fifth and 14th Amendments' guarantees of due process and equal protection. These aren't abstract principles. They're supposed to be the very shield that guards all of us, citizens and non-citizens alike, from government abuse. Yet, what Casten revealed is that in many ICE operations, these protections are practically non-existent. People disappear into a bureaucratic void, detained, denied counsel, stripped of rights, and often no one can even confirm where they are. That's not law enforcement. That's a moral failure. It's the transformation of a government agency into a tool of fear rather than justice. But Casten didn't stop there. He went further, asking a critical question few in Congress have the courage to confront. When the federal government breaks the law, who holds it accountable? If ICE officers or any federal agents commit acts that would be criminal for anyone else, breaking into homes, detaining people unlawfully, even committing acts of violence, why are they so often shielded from prosecution? Why do our so-called law and order politicians suddenly go silent when the enforcers are the ones violating the law? It's a profound irony. The same party that screams about protecting children, defending the Constitution, and upholding American values seems perfectly comfortable ignoring those values when they're politically inconvenient. And that's the hypocrisy Casten tore open: the uncomfortable truth that the right's obsession with law and order is often just selective outrage. Then came Pastor Black's closing remarks, and this is where the hearing transcended politics. He reframed everything through the lens of faith and morality. When he reminded the committee that Jesus is suffering as they suffer, he was calling out the hollow religiosity of leaders like Speaker Mike Johnson, men who quote scripture to justify power but forget the parts about compassion, justice, and love for the oppressed. Johnson has said, "If you want to know what I believe, read the Bible." Well, Pastor Black and Casten are both asking, what part of that Bible condones cruelty? What part justifies the suffering of families, the abuse of power, or the silence in the face of injustice? That's the heart of this entire exchange. It's not about partisan lines. It's about moral clarity, about recognizing that the health of a democracy isn't measured by its wealth or its rhetoric. It's measured by how it treats the most vulnerable people within it. When the machinery of the state is turned against them, when justice becomes selective, when truth is suppressed to protect the powerful, that's when democracy begins to rot from the inside. So what do we, the people, do with this? We don't just nod and scroll on. We don't treat this as just another headline in the endless churn of political outrage. We reflect, we remember, and we act. Because Sean Casten's outrage is a mirror, one that shows us what's being done in our name, with our tax dollars, under the banner of protection. It forces us to ask, protection for whom? Certainly not the families torn apart, not the children left in cages, not the victims of exploitation whose skill await justice. Accountability doesn't happen by accident. It happens when citizens, you and me, stay awake, stay informed, and demand better. It happens when we refuse to normalize cruelty, no matter how it's justified. It happens when we use our voices, our platforms, and our votes to remind every elected official that no one, not a president, not a speaker, not an officer, is above the law. This is why moments like these matter, because truth still has power when it's spoken without fear. Because moral courage, not partisan loyalty, is what ultimately defines leadership. And because in times like these, silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. So if you believe in accountability, if you believe that democracy means equal justice under the law, if you believe that compassion and truth still belong in politics, then stay engaged. Share this story, start conversations, challenge misinformation, and most importantly, vote like your rights and your neighbor's rights depend on it, because they do.